Hey everybody, Gina Mizell here, Sixers reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, joined by Keith Pompey, my beat partner, and it is now playoff time. The Sixers begin their first round series on Saturday night against the Toronto Raptors at the Wells Fargo Center. And Keith, we obviously have lots to discuss with this series in particular, but to start off, how do you feel about their overall postseason draw? Obviously, the Raptors in the first round, potentially the Miami Heat in the second round, wouldn't see Boston or Milwaukee until the Eastern Conference Finals. Just when you kind of look at the Sixers' overall path to a potential finals run or a championship push, just how do you feel like things sort of shook out for them?
I would have to say for the first round, I think this is possibly their not toughest draw. I think Brooklyn would have been their toughest draw, but outside of Brooklyn, this is the team that if I'm the 76ers, I didn't want to face the Toronto Raptors at all, right? I think that's a tough matchup with the length that Toronto has. You have Pascal Siakam, who's a pretty good player, a great player, I might add. But if they can get past Toronto, I would rather face the Miami Heat as opposed to facing Boston, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee. So I think when you look at the 76ers, it's one of those things where it's heavy, it's hard in the beginning. Not to say that they can go out there and like destroy Miami, but I like their chances against Miami than I do against Brooklyn, Boston, and the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, no, it went right down to the wire too, with the 2, 3, 4 seeds with Boston, Milwaukee, and the Sixers figuring out how they would finish. And like you mentioned, it's not an easy series against the Raptors. Toronto won 3 out of the 4 regular season meetings, including a game just a week ago. We were in Toronto, and that basically, it didn't lock the Sixers into the 4 seed, but it basically made it so that it seemed very likely that this would be the first round matchup. And when we discuss this matchup, we have to talk about sort of not the elephant in the room, but the major storyline as far as Matisse Thybulle not being available for games 3, 4, and possibly 6 if the series goes that far because he is unvaccinated. And so you've written about this. Obviously, it's been a major storyline. Just how much do you think this will impact the Sixers in this series, particularly because of the way that the Raptors play, their roster construction, that length, the athleticism that you just mentioned?
You know what, Gina? I keep going back and forth on it, and here's the reason why. Because as Matisse Thybulle is a great defender, but it just seems like in the first half of games, Matisse Thybulle is auditioning to play in the second half of games. Recently with Doc Rivers, and there's a lot of times, and even when he does play, it's one of those things where they go offense and defense with him and George Niang, or they just say, Matisse, you're not playing, and we're going to go out there and play Danny Green. Now, when you look at Matisse statistics, in the 2 games that he played against Toronto, like one game he had 4 blocks, he had 3 steals. The other game he was just quiet. He didn't do anything. So if you get the great Matisse Thybulle in regards to defensively, yes, they're going to miss him because of a guy like Pascal Siakam, and then you have Precious Achiuwa, a guy who you think is not going to hurt you, but he's always open. And then that will enable somebody else to, like Matisse could do Pascal, and then someone else could do Precious, but and the other guys. But to me, it's one of those things where if I'm the Sixers and I'm Sixers fans, I know you get like upset and you're upset with Matisse. You're saying what's going to happen, but the only how it would impact them if it's the great Matisse Thybulle, because there has been some games where he just didn't play late in the games because of his ineffectiveness.
Yeah, he's been inconsistent on offense. There's been moments where, you see him cutting, you see him screening and rolling. You saw him have kind of an early connection with James Harden, but that's sort of teetered off a little bit, or again, just not been there every single game. But yeah, his defense, he is the best perimeter defender. And Danny Green's now sliding into that starting spot, at least for those games. We'll see if he starts games 1 and 2 as well. That'll be really interesting to see. But he's had a choppy season. He's been a lot of injuries, but he played well in Toronto. That was his best game of the season. And then it's kind of hard to judge those last 2 games of the regular season, but that is who would at least immediately fill that role.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and he will. I mean, especially, the good thing you like about this for Danny, I mean, we were there. Danny invited us to his function. He loves it in Toronto. He gets motivated playing against Toronto. But at 35 years of age, the question is, can he sustain it for 6 games, sustain playing at a high level? So,
yeah,
we'll find out.
Well, we'll also have to talk about James Harden. This is a huge playoff run for him. Joel Embiid. We don't know if he's won MVP yet. Those votes have already been cast and won't be revealed for a little while. And I think there's a lot of pressure on Doc Rivers as well to deliver for this team. And so when you sort of look at the 3 heads of the snake, so to speak, of this organization, of this team with Embiid, Harden, and Doc Rivers, just how do you anticipate they're going to handle this scenario, and just how much pressure is on all 3 of them or each of them individually?
I think Joel will come to play. I do. I mean, the big thing to watch out for Joel is he's going to put on like his hard hat. He's going to do things. But to me, it's like, if teammates aren't making shots, is he still going to make that pass out of the double team? And you know what I'm saying? Is he going to try to do a little bit too much, right? So that's the main question with Joel, because if they're making shots, knocking down shots, he's going to be a willing passer. And if not, I don't think he can beat the Raptors by himself by turning around and facing. He's going to turn the ball over a lot, right? When we get to Doc Rivers and James Harden, that's like the big unknowns, because, there's a lot of pressure on Doc just to get out of the first round. I mean, you think about it. Here's a guy who signed a 5-year deal worth $40 million a couple of years ago. And he took the team last year. They won they won the regular season title, but they go out in the second round, right? Brett Brown was fired because he couldn't get them out of the second round. And if Doc Rivers lose in the first round, then people are going to look like, even though it's not his fault, totally his fault, people are going to look at it and they're going to say, wow, this guy went out. James Harden, the pressure with James is, as great as James is, he's a top 75 player, a future Hall of Famer, 3-time scoring champion, a former MVP, 2018 MVP, but he has a knack for struggling in the playoffs, especially in big games. So, and then right now, he hasn't exactly looked well in the 2 games that he played against Toronto. The last game, I think he shot 3 for 12, and he had multiple turnovers, 2 air balls in the fourth quarter. So to me, it's like a wait and see. We want to see what he can do, but there's pressure with him as well, because as you know, the people in Philadelphia will boo you and they will hold it against you. So for Doc and James, I think that we're going to find out a lot about them. And I think Joel Embiid just has to remain patient and continue to pass out of double teams.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Joel is the best player in this series. And a lot of times that is enough, at least in the first round. But you would say on paper, James Harden is clearly the second best player. Has he played like that the last few weeks? Not necessarily. So you could make an argument for someone like a Pascal Siakam. And then, yeah, coaching is going to be really, really interesting, because it's a coaching matchup between Doc and Nick Nurse, who's known to be very, very crafty, known for throwing a lot of different defenses at teams, at adjustments, and doing a lot of crazy stuff. And he's obviously won a title just like Doc has. So I think that's going to be really interesting. But those are the headliners and the major newsy thing. But if you had to pick an X factor player or something that you think could swing the series one way or the other that maybe people aren't thinking about, is there something that immediately comes to mind?
Yeah, for the 76ers, I would have, and it's crazy considering him as an X factor, right? Because of the success that he had this season. Initially I would say Danny Green, but I'm gonna go a step further. I think it's Tyrese Maxey.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is just because of, Tyrese, when everything is going well, he gets out in transition and scores. He hits big shots. There has been certain games when he went up against Phoenix and he went up against Milwaukee, where he looked like a young guard. I think that right now for the Sixers to have success, it's Tyrese Maxey has to play great. I think he has to do very well. And I think if he does that with his athleticism, it's just going to open up things for everyone on the floor. So even though I think that he is an elite player, I'm still going to make him my X factor for the 76ers in this series. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's fair, just given he does have limited playoff experience and not in this type of role where he's going to be counted on. And he's certainly answered the challenge every step of the way this season. So there's no reason to think he will not do that, but it's still a question mark. I'm going to go with the bench just because, obviously a rotation shortens in the playoffs that, these guys aren't going to play as many minutes as maybe they would during the regular season, but that's been a very, very touchy subject in some regards if you ask Doc Rivers, but just it's been something that's been a focal point just because of the guys that they traded to get James Harden. Whether it is DeAndre Jordan or Paul Reed playing, whether has Shake Milton sort of come around after an inconsistent season, can George Niang be consistent knocking down 3-pointers? Just when you sort of look down the line, can these guys provide the boost when a Joel Embiid's off the floor, when a Tyrese Maxey's resting, when a James Harden or Tobias Harris is off the floor? Like, you just need enough from them. You don't need them to take over a game, but can they give you enough to sustain in a series where, again, the Raptors are just going to throw out long athletic dude after long athletic dude after long athletic dude? Should we do predictions, or will we leave that up to the fans and other people who are not us?
I mean, we could give them. I mean, and here's the thing. I hope the Sixers prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. I hope they do. But I've been saying all week that I have the Raptors winning in 6. I just have the Raptors winning in 6. And I know people are going to destroy me and even blow up my email if the Sixers win, but I have the Raptors winning in 6.
I would not be surprised if that was the result. I will take the Sixers in 7 because of Joel Embiid, but given everything we just talked about, I would not be shocked if the Raptors pulled this off as well. And then that would set up a very interesting offseason for us and for this team, just because this is a team that thinks it's going to make a championship push, and to go out in the first round would be really, really difficult and not good for this team. So we will see what happens. Again, game 1, 6 p.m. on Saturday at the Wells Fargo Center. Sixers-Raptors. It's finally playoff time. Keith, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.